Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now, let's get into today's tale. You're just not a team player, Mia. Your attitude has become increasingly unprofessional and disruptive. Those words hung in the air of the windowless conference room like poison gas. I felt my cheeks burn as Human Resources Director Candace Whitfield slid my performance review across the polished table. 3 pairs of eyes watched me. Candace's cold stare, my direct supervisor Calvin Reeves' nervous glance, and CEO Richard Gareth Crow's bored indifference. I'd spent 4 years at Pinnacle Medical Solutions. 4 years of overtime, missed birthdays, and just this once weekend work. 4 years of watching patients get denied coverage while executives received bonuses. And this was my reward, a performance review designed to push me out the door. My name is Sienna Vale, 34 years old, former compliance specialist at one of the largest healthcare administration companies you've never heard of. Before I go further, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I will read every single one. I wish I could tell you I always plan to expose them, that I'm some kind of corporate whistleblower hero. The truth is messier. 6 months ago, I was still drinking the company Kool-Aid, believing we were just an understaffed team doing our best in a complex industry. That changed on a Tuesday in March. I remember because it was my nephew Elijah's birthday, and I'd promised to leave work early for his party. I was gathering my things when Calvin Reeve messaged me. Emergency meeting with Gareth Crow, mandatory. I texted my sister an apology as I trudged to the executive conference room. I slipped in quietly, taking the last empty chair near the door. They were already deep in discussion, spreadsheets projected on the wall. The Westlake audit is next month, Gareth Crow was saying, his voice tight. We're looking at potential penalties of 8 figures if they dig into the rural claims processing. Calvin Reeve nodded frantically. We've been bypassing the secondary review protocols for almost 2 years in those counties, saving us about 30% on processing costs. But if anyone bothers to check, Candace finished bluntly. I froze. Secondary reviews were mandated by state regulations. They ensured patients weren't wrongfully denied coverage due to clerical errors or technicalities. Skipping them was more than corner cutting. It was illegal, potentially fatal for patients awaiting critical care. Can we backdate some reviews? Someone suggested. Create a paper trail? Too risky, Gareth Crow dismissed. We need to scrub the existing records, make it look like those claims never existed. I must have made a noise, a gasp, maybe, because suddenly all eyes turned to me. Mia, Gareth Crow smiled thinly. Didn't see you there. This is sensitive executive planning. You understand the need for discretion, right? I nodded mechanically, my mouth dry. As the meeting continued, I realized something critical. They were speaking openly because they assumed I was complicit. How many times had I processed paperwork without questioning the missing reviews? How many patients had suffered because I didn't look closely enough? That night, instead of cake with my nephew, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, shaking, not just from what I'd heard, but from the realization that I had been part of it. My phone buzzed with texts from my sister, showing Elijah's disappointed face. Another family moment sacrificed for a company that was actively harming people. I made a decision that night, not some grand moral stand, just a quiet promise. To myself that I wouldn't look away anymore. The next day, I started keeping records. I installed a voice recording app on my phone. Nothing fancy, just something that would capture evidence if needed. I began volunteering for projects that gave me access to the rural claims data. I stayed late reviewing files, documenting patterns of denied claims without proper review. What I found was worse than I imagined. Cancer treatments delayed until patients were terminal. Children with chronic conditions denied specialist care. Elderly patients forced to choose between medication and food, all because proper reviews would cost the company money. For 2 months, I gathered information quietly. I saved emails, recorded meetings, when I could do so legally in our one-party consent state. I documented everything, uploading it all to an encrypted cloud drive only I could access. That's when the atmosphere at work changed. Calvin Reeves started excluding me from meetings. Assignments were rerouted. Co-workers who used to chat with me at lunch suddenly found reasons to eat at their desks. I found out why when Marin Holt from accounting texted me after work. They're building a case against you. Heard Candace and Calvin Reeve talking. They know you've been accessing files outside your immediate responsibilities. My stomach dropped. They hadn't figured out I was documenting their fraud, but they'd noticed my unusual activity. And rather than question why, they decided I was the problem to eliminate. The next morning, an email appeared in my inbox. Performance review meeting, Thursday, 2 p.m. 3 days away. They were moving fast. I spent those 3 days preparing. I reviewed state whistleblower protections. I organized my evidence. I spoke with a lawyer friend who specialized in corporate malfeasance, careful to keep names vague. If what you're describing is accurate, she said gravely, this isn't just an employment issue. It's potentially criminal. But, Mia, her voice softened, these companies have resources you don't. They'll try to destroy you. Are you sure? Was I sure? No, I was terrified. But I kept thinking about my mother's battle with insurance when she got sick. The denied claims, the hours on the phone, the mounting bills. How many families were going through that because of Pinnacle's policies? Thursday. Arrived with cold rain that matched my mood. I dressed carefully. Professional gray suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, the kind of forgettable appearance that wouldn't give them anything to criticize. In my bag, my phone with the recording, app ready, a small notebook, and a USB drive with backup copies of everything. At 1:55, I walked into the conference room. Candace, Calvin Reeve, and Gareth Crowe were already seated, a united front across the table. A thick folder lay before Candace, my personnel file, no doubt filled with recently documented concerns. Mia, thank you for joining us, Candace began, as if I had a choice. We've been monitoring your performance over the past quarter, and frankly, we have serious concerns. I nodded, saying nothing. Your attitude has become increasingly problematic, she continued. You've been accessing files outside your purview, asking uncomfortable questions in team meetings, and creating what many colleagues describe as a hostile atmosphere. Calvin Reeve jumped in, not meeting my eyes. You used to be such a team player, Mia. What happened? What happened? I wanted to scream. We're denying sick people care to save money. We're breaking the law. People might be dying. But I kept my face neutral. Additionally, Candace continued, sliding a document across the table, we've noticed concerning patterns in your time management. Extended lunches, arriving late to meetings. These behaviors reflect poorly on your commitment to Pinnacle's values. The document was a written warning, the first formal step toward termination. It cited incidents that were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. At the bottom, a line for my signature acknowledging my performance deficiencies. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Gareth Crowe finally spoke, checking his watch. He clearly expected this to be quick. Another problematic employee, neutralized before the audit. I took a slow breath. I appreciate your candid feedback, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened the recording app. Before I respond to these specific points, I'd like to share something relevant to this discussion. Candace's eyebrow arched. This isn't really the appropriate time. It'll only take a moment, I said, pressing play. Gareth Crowe's voice filled the room. We need to scrub the existing records, make it look like those claims never existed. Calvin Reeve, if we're caught altering documentation, that's fraud. Gareth Crowe again. The alternative is guaranteed penalties that will tank our stock before the merger. Do whatever it takes. Those patients already had their claims processed. Not our fault if the paperwork disappears. I looked up from my phone. The color had drained from Calvin Reeve's face. Candace sat frozen, pen hovering above my performance review. And Gareth Crowe, his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to cold fury in the span of 3 seconds. Turn that off, he hissed. I did, but held up my phone. I have the entire meeting, and many others. I also have documentation of 342 claims where required secondary reviews were skipped in the past 18 months. Patients who were denied care they were legally entitled to receive. You recorded private conversations? Candace found her voice, trying to regain control. That's grounds for immediate termination. It's completely illegal. I finished for her. Not in this state. One-party consent means I can legally record any conversation I'm part of. And as for accessing files outside my purview, I smiled, thinly. That's exactly what this performance review is about, isn't it? You noticed I was looking at the rural claims data. You just didn't realize why. The silence in that room was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else. Fear. The kind that makes powerful people suddenly remember they're still human. What do you want? Gareth Crow asked finally, his voice unnaturally quiet. It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. What did I want? Revenge? Money? To burn it all down? I began, but the conference room door swung open. Marjorie Delaney, the company's chief legal counsel, stepped in. I'd only met her once before, during new hire orientation. She was tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of calm, authority that commanded a room without effort. I apologize for interrupting, she said smoothly. But Mr. Gareth Crow, there's an urgent situation requiring your immediate attention. Gareth Crow stood quickly. Too quickly. We'll need to continue this another time. I'm Mia, actually, Marjorie said. I'd like Miss Chen to join us as well. Her eyes met mine, unreadable, but intense. Bring your phone. As I gathered my things, Calvin Reeve touched my arm. Mia, wait, he started, but I pulled away. Don't, I said quietly. Just don't. I followed Marjorie and Gareth Crow, out of the conference room, down the hallway toward the executive offices. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't how I'd planned things. Who had called Marjorie? What happened to my carefully rehearsed confrontation? Marjorie opened the door to a larger conference room, gesturing for me to enter first. I stepped inside and froze. 3 people I'd never seen before sat at the table, alongside Pinnacle's chairman of the board. They wore serious expressions and had notebooks open before them. Miss Chen, Marjorie said. These are representatives from the State Medical Board and Department of Insurance. They've been conducting a confidential investigation into Pinnacle's claims processing procedures for the past 3 months. They would very much like to hear what you have to say. Gareth Crow's face went from pale to gray. What is this? He demanded. The oldest of the visitors, a woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes, looked up. Mr. Gareth Crow, please take a seat. We have some questions about rural claims processing that Miss Chen might be able to help us with. I stood there, clutching my phone, suddenly understanding that the game had just changed completely. Whatever I had set in motion was now bigger than a performance review. Bigger than my job. Bigger than me. Miss Chen, Marjorie gestured to an empty chair. I believe you are about to share some recordings. I lowered myself into the chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. The woman with silver-streaked hair slid her business card across the table. Dr. Vivian Vera Quinn, Chief Investigator, State Medical Board. Miss Chen, she said, her voice gentler than her appearance suggested. We've been investigating Pinnacle for months based on statistical anomalies in rural claim denials. What we've lacked is concrete internal evidence of intentional wrongdoing. Glanced at Marjorie, confused by her role in this. She nodded slightly, as if giving me permission. I don't understand, I said. You're the company's lawyer. Aren't you supposed to be protecting them? Marjorie's smile was tired, but genuine. I'm tasked with protecting Pinnacle Medical Solutions as an entity, Miss Chen. Sometimes that means protecting it from its own leadership. She shot a cold look at Gareth Crow. When certain patterns came to my attention last month, I had ethical and legal obligations that superseded loyalty to any individual executive. Gareth Crow's face contorted with rage. You sanctimonious! You've been working against me. The board will have your license for this." "Actually, Richard," said the older man I recognized as Chairman Elliot Bishop, "the board authorized Miss Delaney's cooperation with this investigation 3 weeks ago." His voice was heavy with disappointment. "We just didn't inform you, or certain members of your executive team. For obvious reasons. The realization that I wasn't alone, that others had seen what was happening and were already acting, sent a wave of emotion through me so powerful I had to press my palms against the table to steady myself." "Miss Chen," Dr. Vera Quinn prompted, "you mentioned recordings?" With trembling fingers, I unlocked my phone and pulled up the folder of evidence I'd carefully organized. I have recordings from multiple meetings where executives explicitly discussed bypassing required reviews and altering records before the audit. I also have documentation showing patterns of denied claims that should have received secondary review. One of the other investigators, a younger man with kind eyes, slid a thumb drive across to me. "Would you be willing to transfer your files? We can provide formal protection for you as a whistleblower, effective immediately." As I connected my phone, Gareth Crowe stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You can't possibly take the word of a disgruntled employee with an obvious agenda. She was literally in a performance review for substandard work when you arrived." "A conveniently timed performance review," Marjorie noted dryly, "scheduled immediately after she began accessing the rural claims database." "Miss Chen," Dr. Vera Quinn said, ignoring Gareth Crowe's outburst, "can you tell us when you first became aware of the issues with claims processing?" For the next hour, I walked them through everything. The March meeting, my gradual discovery of the pattern, the specific cases I'd identified. I showed them emails, played recordings, explained the internal codes used to track denied claims. Throughout, Gareth Crowe sat in seething silence, while Calvin Reeve stared at his hands, occasionally offering quiet confirmation of my statements. When I finished, Dr. Vera Quinn closed her notebook. "Miss Chen, I want to thank you for your courage. What happens next will take time. Investigations like this aren't resolved overnight, but I want you to know that your actions today will likely help hundreds, perhaps thousands of patients receive the care they've been wrongfully denied." Silas Brandt cleared his throat. "Miss Chen, the board would like to request that you consider staying with Pinnacle during this transition period. We'll need someone intimately familiar with these issues to help address them." He glanced at Gareth Crowe. "Obviously, with significant changes to your reporting structure and compensation." I almost laughed. "Stay, after everything?" "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I think my presence would complicate an already difficult situation." What I didn't say, I couldn't imagine walking through those doors every day, facing coworkers who'd watched in silence, sitting in meetings with people who'd tried to destroy me. Dr. Vera Quinn handed me another card. "Please call my direct line tomorrow. We'll need formal statements, and there are details about whistleblower protections we should discuss." As the meeting concluded, people began gathering their things. Calvin Reeve approached me hesitantly. "Mia." "Save it," I said. The words were sharper than I'd intended. You knew what was happening to those patients, and you chose your bonus over their lives." "It wasn't that simple," he protested weakly. "It never is, Calvin Reeve," I replied, suddenly exhausted. "That's how people like you sleep at night." I walked out of Pinnacle's glass headquarters at 6:17 p.m., the security guard's curious gaze following me as I surrendered my badge. The spring air felt impossibly fresh after the recycled oxygen of that conference room. I drove home in a daze, the radio playing songs I couldn't hear over the roar in my head. My apartment felt strange when I entered, unchanged, yet fundamentally different, like returning home after a long journey. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and stood in my silent living room, waiting for the relief, the triumph, the sense of justice that should accompany this moment. Instead, I felt hollow, empty. I'd done the right thing, yes. But at what cost? My career in healthcare administration was effectively over. No company would hire someone with whistleblower attached to their reputation, regardless of how justified my actions had been. I sank onto my couch and finally let myself cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. I cried for the patients who'd suffered because of Pinnacle's policies. I cried for my own complicity before I'd understood what was happening. I cried for the simple life I'd had just 6 months ago when I'd believed in the system I worked for. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from coworkers who'd already heard rumors. I ignored them all, except one, from Marin Holt in accounting. Holy, Mia. Is it true? Did you take down Gareth Crow? Call me. Crow? Call me. Crow? She scanned the room, then focused on me. And we're establishing a permanent compliance ombudsman role. Someone who reports directly to the board, with authority to investigate any concerns without fear of executive interference. She walked toward me. Miss Chen, we would be honored if you would consider taking this position. No one understands better than you what happens when these systems fail, and what it takes to fix them. The room went quiet. Everyone watched, waiting for my response. 6 months ago, I would have laughed at the idea of returning to Pinnacle in any capacity. But now, I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. I'd need to understand the parameters of the role before I could consider it. Dr. Moreno nodded. Of course, no pressure. Just an open door, when you're ready to discuss it. As the reception ended, I found myself standing once more in Pinnacle's lobby, waiting for the elevator. Dr. Hartley joined me, putting on her coat. Quite a journey, Miss Chen, she remarked. From being called unprofessional in a performance review to being offered a suite position with board access. I smiled faintly. Not the revenge I imagined when I walked into that performance review. Isn't it, though? She asked, her eyes knowing. The company that tried to destroy you is now begging for your help to rebuild its integrity. The executives who threatened you are facing charges. And most importantly, thousands of patients will receive the care they deserve. The elevator arrived and she stepped inside. Sounds like the best kind of revenge to me. The kind that heals instead of hurts. As I walked to my car, I realized she was right. My victory wasn't in watching Gareth Crow's downfall, or in the professional opportunities that had come my way. It was in knowing that I'd faced a moment of moral challenge and chosen courage over comfort. That when it mattered most, I had done what was right instead of what was easy. I still keep those 27 names on my desk, not as a trophy of my whistleblowing, but as a reminder that systems fail when good people stay silent, that the cost of looking away is measured in human lives, and that sometimes the most powerful act of revenge against a corrupt system is simply telling the truth, no matter the personal cost. Have you ever faced a moment where speaking up felt impossible, but staying silent felt wrong? What did you choose, and could you make a different choice today? Tell me in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe. I share a new truth from my life each week, and I read every single comment. Remember, courage isn't the absence of fear.